social partners. The President of the European Parliament, the President of the European Commission also signed, as did I, as a host, and then we handed it over to the President of the European Council to carry this forward. It's a very important agreement. Social partners all commit themselves to implementing the action plan in order to implement the European social pillar of social rights. Back in 2017, 20 key principles were approved. Now we have an action plan, basically tangible projects which will implement these key principles for the day-to-day lives of our citizens. Now, this social summit in Porto isn't a point of arrival, it's a point of departure. We have a proposal from the Commission, and there was a broad agreement from all social partners that this action plan should be implemented. It's not an action plan like any old action plan. It has quantified targets for employment, for training, for combating poverty. This is an action plan that foresees a monitoring of its implementation in each and every European semester. The European semester will no longer be just an exercise in monitoring the macroeconomic indicators, the debt, GDP, but it will also now look at combating poverty, reaching training targets, creating new jobs. The social pillar comes at a very important point in time when the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us once again what is important for Europe, its social model. It's a year where we've all rediscovered fundamental values, such as we are not protected until everyone is protected. And this new European Europe of social rights is absolutely vital. In a special Eurobarometer that was drawn up at the end of 2020, 9 out of 10 Europeans said they wanted to move to a social Europe. And that's why the Commission presented its action plan. That is why the Portuguese Presidency organized this summit. That is why the European Parliament signed it today with the European social partners. I think we can all leave today with the hope that we have laid the good foundations for economic recovery, but a recovery that is based on the twin digital and climate transition, but also a fair transition. And this is why this social pillar comes at a very important time, because these twin digital and climate transitions will lead to great social challenges, employment, training, upskilling, a transition from one job to another. We need to create more jobs, but better jobs. Europeans have to know that this transition will be green and digital and fair. So, on behalf of the Portuguese Presidency, I would like to thank everyone for their involvement. Thank you to the European Parliament for the enormous efforts and for the contribution of their resolution to this summit. I would also like to thank the Economic and Social Committee and the Committee of the Regions, and in particular I would like to thank Ursula for the joint work that we've done and for helping me co-host the meeting. Thank you very much, Ursula von der Leyen.
Thank you very much, Antonio. Thank you very much, David, for this very extraordinary social summit. It was impressive to witness it during the day. And I must say, you really delivered on what the expectations were. We had 5 years ago, indeed, Gothenburg with the first social summit. and the principles enshrined. But now, 5 years later, for the very first time, all the social partners were not only present, but they signed the commitment. A joint commitment signed by all the different stakeholders that were part today. So this is not only about the principles that were so important, but this is about action. This is about to deliver to the people. And indeed, we've been discussing a lot what is typical for the European social market economy. A social market economy that gives opportunity to people, but that also protects against illness, ill fortune, unemployment, the great risks of life, reliable. And with the pandemic, of course, we had an incredible difficult time, and we still have an incredible difficult time with all the negative impact of the pandemic. But sometimes the approach towards social Europe reminds me of our vaccination campaign. During the first year that we just had now with the pandemic, kind of the first shot was that we did everything to protect lives and livelihoods. That is, for example, by creating the SURE instrument to make sure that people stay in employment, but also by flexibilizing all the European funds in order to inject money in the economy to get people through the worst phase of the pandemic we've seen so far. But now comes the second shot, which is basically the long-term recovery. And it is flanked by Next Generation EU, our investment and recovery package worth 750 billion euro, indeed, as you said, Antonio, with a clear priority of digitization and the European Green Deal. But flanking to that too come now our three basic targets to 2030, to create jobs, better jobs, good jobs, future-proof jobs. And one part is, of course, the investment through Next Generation EU, investment and reforms. But of course, a lot depends on our employers and trade unions present today. The goal is at least 78% of EU adults in employment by 2030. At least 60% of all adults participating in training every year. Here too, we need all the stakeholders. We need the employers, we need the trade unions, we need the organizations and civil society, but of course also the infrastructure by the heads of state and government or by the member states, flanked by cohesion funds and flanked by European social funds. And the third target, reducing the number of people at risk of poverty by at least 15 million, including at least 5 million children. The most noble task, to get children out of poverty. We know the main pillar is give their parents a job, but also make sure that these children have a good education, have access to childcare, have access to good schools. And there we need, as I've said in the meeting, it takes a whole village to raise a child. It takes the whole of the European Union to get children out of poverty. So thank you very much for this impressive social summit. The delivery, it's about delivery, the motto of the Portuguese presidency.
Grazie. Buonasera.
Thank you. Good evening. Well, thank you very much, Prime Minister Costa, dear Antonio. Thank you also, Ursula. Thank you also to all who have organized this meeting. And thank you to all the social partners and entrepreneurs who have worked to ensure that here in Porto we kept a promise, because we came to Porto to keep a promise. A promise that last year our institutions, our political forces, our social forces said when the pandemic was beginning that nobody should be left behind. And we came to Porto to keep this promise. And the text that we've signed today and the commitment of Prime Minister Costa and the Portuguese presidency was to put a social policy at the heart of the EU so that nobody gets left behind. And that is the reason for our visit to Porto. And I would like to thank all the institutions, the political groups of the European Parliament, our rapporteurs, the social partners, the trade unions, the world of employers. Because today we've had the opportunity to develop concrete policies that will help our citizens through these difficult, painful times where people are losing jobs, a time where people's rights can backtrack. I think it's a great day for the European today. It's a great day for the citizens. And it is now up to all institutions to cooperate with each other and also to sit down and discuss matters so as to implement these tangible actions. I think this was the spirit which imbued us in our meeting here in Porto, and thank you to Antonio for convening this meeting, because environmental, digital transitions are important, but the lives of people should be at the very heart of this, especially the most fragile people. They should be at the very heart of our work and our priorities. Thank you.
Temos agora tempo para...
Right, we now have time for some questions and answers. We have the first question.
Rita Caesar with Público. Madam President, hope you get some time to enjoy my hometown. But I know that you will be joining the rest of the leaders now for a debate a first debate on this idea, suggestion by the American president of a temporary waiver of IPP rights for vaccines. I was wondering if you could let us know what your considerations are going to be, and if you're concerned about the possibility of technology transfers to places such as Russia or China. And Sr. Primeiro-Ministro referiu a...
Prime Minister, you just referred just now to the very ambitious commitment that you have just signed, and I'd like to ask you, would it not be more ambitious to have not just indicative or quantitative targets, but binding targets?
What the temporary waiver of IP rights is concerned, the discussion about it, I think we should be open to this discussion. But when we lead this discussion, there needs to be a 360-degree view on it, because we need vaccines now for the whole world. And in the short and medium term, the IP waiver will not solve the problems, will not bring a single dose of vaccine in the short and medium term. So what is necessary in the short term and medium term? First of all, vaccine sharing. Secondly, export of vaccines that are being produced. And the third is investment in increasing the capacity to manufacture vaccines. And very clearly on that, the European Union has started its vaccine sharing mechanism, for example, now being able to deliver 650,000 doses to the Western Balkan. And we are grateful that now also the vaccine sharing mechanism is being established for the Eastern Partnership. On the second topic, the export, the European Union is the only continental or democratic region of this world that is exporting at large scale. Around 50% of what is being produced in Europe is exported to almost 90 countries, including COVAX. It's 200 million doses so far that have been exported, and around about 200 million doses have been delivered to the European people. And we invite all those who engage in the debate of a waiver for IP rights also to join us, to commit, to be willing to export a large share of what is being produced in that region. And the third point, indeed, this is for all of us, the investment in capacities, not only in, for example, European capacities, but also to work with the pharmaceutical companies to invest in capacities, for example, in Africa, to build up the capacities over time.
Well, one of the good effects of this summit is that we've all been able to come home. We're all happy to be back home. On your question, the fact that this action plan doesn't only set out actions, but sets out targets, results to be achieved, that is very important. Because it's not just a matter of saying, oh, well, let's increase employment. No, we're talking about 78% employment by 2030. We're not just saying, oh, let's increase training. No, we're saying 60% of the European population has to carry out at least one training course a year. We're not just saying we're going to reduce poverty. We're saying, no, we're going to lift 15 million people out of poverty, and 5 million of them will be children. Secondly, if we have set more stringent targets than we set last year, because those were targets for 2019. So we're not looking back to 2019. We need to reduce even more the poverty, reduce poverty from 2020 and 2021. So we're much more stringent in our targets. And then as to whether these are binding, well, all the social partners today entered into the commitment to breathe new life into this action plan and to achieve these results. And tomorrow, at the end of the Council meeting, we will have a press conference so as to share with you the outcome of the European Council meeting and our response to the target set by the Commission. Now, I don't think that we mustn't say that these targets are not ambitious. I think they're enormously ambitious on a European level. Yes, the next question, Pascal Hansen, Agence Europe.
Oui. Yes, hello. Pascal Hansen from Agence Europe. May I ask my question in French, if it's okay? Yes? Okay, great. Let's go.
My first question is that today the social partners have submitted a document to Charles Michel, who is not here, on GDP. What is the next step in terms of this document? Will the European Commission include this proposal in a revision of the social scoreboard as part of the European semester? My second question is more for Ursula von der Leyen. In the recovery plan, there are figures with numbers for investments in digitalization, in greening, and for social aspects. Can the Commission explain why it took that decision? And once all the national plans have been submitted to the Commission, will the Commission be able to say how much investment has been put into the social aspect?
Thank you. So indeed, the decision, as you described correctly, has been taken because for the same reason as we have called this huge recovery plan Next Generation EU. Because if we are, as a European Union, backed by the member states, raising 750 billion euro on the capital market, that we have to pay back one day, it is for us all important that it is being strategically invested in future-proof priorities of the European Union that mitigates the risks coming up for the next generation and improves the perspective of the next generation. And indeed, the looming crisis behind the crisis of the pandemic, the bigger looming overarching crisis is climate change. Therefore, 37% of the so-called RRF is going into the European Green Deal. But we will not be able to, for example, be successful in the European Green Deal or being successful in the future without digitization. Therefore, indeed, the 20% in digitization and the social is self-explaining after what you've heard here today. Now, your question implies also, are we going to keep track? And there's a very dedicated, detailed system of targets, of milestones, of costing estimates that have to be delivered, and it's written in legal text, so it's binding, so that you can monitor, all different sides can monitor that these legally binding steps are really fulfilled by the member states in order to get the next tranche of what is being dispersed.
Duarte Valente, RTP.
Duarte Valente from RTP. I'll ask my questions in Portuguese, if you don't mind. Primeira pergunta.
The first question for the three presidents. After what you heard from the social partners today, do you still have the historic objective to actually implement what's been achieved in Porto? And after this, do you agree with President Macron that the Recovery and Resilience Fund is not enough to get over the crisis and that we need more money to ensure that the European economy recovers? Thank you. Well, we, a few years ago, thought that Göteborg would allow the Union to implement actions in order to improve our citizens' lives and especially to support the most weak. Now, we waited a long time, which is why today we can say that today is a historic day. The EU has realized that the social pillar is fundamental. We cannot have a recovery. We cannot reduce inequality. We cannot protect the weakest unless we develop policies, policies that we have set out in the text today that will allow us to achieve our targets. This is why it's such an important day.
Okay. Indeed, the fact that today all social partners, organizations, civil society were here, and you have seen the stakeholders that have signed this commitment is one of the strongest proof for the commitment. The second point that is important, I always am a believer in the motto, only what you can measure really gets done. And therefore there's a precise goal that you can measure in it. It is ambitious, but it is achievable. And therefore this is a strong commitment of all those who signed to deliver. And what the second question is concerned, Next Generation EU right now is larger than the Marshall Plan. So it is an enormous investment in Europe. We've gone through this crisis by going step by step. At the beginning of the crisis, we never would have imagined to have in place the SURE instrument, 100 billion euro to keep people in employment during the crisis. Now even larger, Next Generation EU. And for me it's important, first of all, now make it happen and deliver. That is, the national recovery plans have to be approved. All own resources decisions have to be ratified in the national parliaments. Before this isn't done, we cannot go to the market to raise money. So we have to prove right now that we're able to deliver. And that is, for me, the most important step right now.
Thank you. Why did I say this is a historic day? Because this time, social partners not only signed the text, but for several months we have worked together, the Presidency, the European Parliament, the Commission, all of us, to draft this commitment together. In Gothenburg, back in 2017, there was a signature between the institutions, the Commission, the Parliament, but the social partners did not sign. We've never had such a broad, ambitious agreement, a true tripartite agreement. All social partners signed. The ETUC, the three institutions representing employers, the civil society platform, President of the Commission, President of the European Parliament. It's unprecedented, which is why it's historic. Now, there are, I know, hopefully there will be equally historic days in the future. But for us, economic recovery is vital. The member states have to conclude their action so that the Commission can go to the markets. Most of these recovery plans have been approved. There's a few more to be approved next week. The Finnish Parliament still has to have theirs approved. So that's the first priority. The second priority is the member states need to conclude their national plans and present them to the Commission. As far as I know, 14 member states have tabled their recovery and resilience plans to the Commission. And this great effort that is being deployed by the Commission will allow us to achieve the approval of all the plans as soon as possible. That is what we want. I've said this on several occasions publicly. We will do our best for it to be possible still under the Portuguese Presidency, so that we can approve the first package. I know the Commission is doing its best, and let's hope that we can achieve this result. We are going to be focusing on that. Now, the recovery and resilience plan has an initial part. 70% has been earmarked on the basis of the GDP 2020, and there's going to be a review in 2022 on the basis of the 2020-2021 GDP and the various percentages that have to be balanced up in the member states in the light of the impact of the crisis there. What is quite clear is that we've got to see what the final impact of the crisis is going to be. We know that the economic indicators are showing that there's a bit of a recovery beginning. Some member states are still in a difficult situation. It depends, of course, on each country and their economic structure. And in fact, the dilemma of our presidency is to actually comply with our undertakings. And that means we need to approve the national action plans so that the European action plan can be implemented. So that's what we need to do now, and that is what we are going to be focusing on.
Question, David Maxwell from Politico.
David Herzenhorn from Politico. During the workshops today, we heard some very strong praise from heads of state and government for the SURE instrument, which of course is an example where the Commission was able to act quite decisively. But as you pointed out, Next Generation EU is not activated because the member states have not all moved to ratify. So for President von der Leyen, does this show that the Commission needs more legal authority and power in the realm of social welfare policy? For Prime Minister Costa, what do you say to assertions that the member states simply aren't able to act fast enough in this arena? And for President Sassoli, please, what concrete benefits based on the legislative files do you expect citizens will see soonest and when? Thank you.
Well, looking back, also the SURE instrument, although completely new, and I'm very proud that we made it with the SURE instrument, took its time. I cannot precisely say anymore when it was finally so mature that we could really disperse money. I think it was the second half of the year. It took us 3, 4, 5 months to get ready. This one is even bigger, and indeed, we urge as much as possible member states to get ready with the own resources decision ratification. We expect member states at best to be done with it end of May. And I tell you why this is so important for us. Because it depends on the month where the last own resources decision has been ratified by the latest member state. We can only go to the market the next month. So if a member state would ratify on the 2nd of June, we could only go to the market on the 1st of July, which would delay us for 1 month and bring us in a bit more difficult situation what the summer break and the possibility to raise money on the market is concerned. Therefore, we are urging all member states to being done with the own resources decision by end of May. That would enable the Commission to go to the capital markets in June and therefore be much faster and efficient in the disbursement of the preloading that is so necessary.
Well, I think that we have appealed to the member states to accelerate the whole process. The majority have already ratified. I think is it three or four left that have to?
I think 4 or 5.
4 or 5?
Who have to ratify.
Okay. Portanto, faltam 4 ou 5.
Okay, 4 or 5 member states still have to ratify. Now, we have already scheduled, they've already scheduled their ratification. Perhaps some are waiting for others to ratify, so they all ratify together, keep each other company. But we're in the final straight. In fact, this week I had the opportunity to discuss matters with some of my colleagues personally to see whether we couldn't ensure that the timeline that we've set is complied with. It's decisive because the market's shut in the summer and we don't want to delay things by another month or so. I think we're all fully aware of the seriousness of the economic crisis in Europe, and we all know that we need to accelerate, and we cannot allow for any dragging of feet for the implementation of the plan, which is absolutely decisive for the whole of Europe. It's on vaccination. As I said, we will not be protected individually until we're all protected, and the same goes for the economic recovery. The recovery only really begins in each individual member state when it begins in all member states, because that's how our internal market works. Well, this crisis has taught us many lessons. It's taught us where we have to improve, where we already have capacity. It's also taught us where we need to make changes. And if we look at the experience we've had over this last year, well, I think many things are now very clear. We have to become much more resilient. We need to increase our capacity to protect the weak. We need to increase our capacity to boost our industry. We need to do more on the digital front. We need to do more for common policies. We need to increase the degree of solidarity. And this year, some extraordinary things have been achieved. Because President von der Leyen and Prime Minister Costa were quite right to recall the experience of SURE. SURE is a social policy instrument that is financed with European bonds, with common debt. I mean, if I had said pre-COVID, let us pool our debt, people would have thought I was going senile. Well, no, this year, extraordinary things have happened. We would like to continue doing extraordinary things. And the President and the Prime Minister are actually quite right when they say that the governments and the parliaments that have not as yet ratified the increase in own resources should do so now. This will allow us to go to the markets and to be successful, because the European Union and the bonds that we issue will be very successful. And all countries need these resources to help their citizens and their undertakings. There's nobody that doesn't need this. So we believe that it is high time to accelerate now. And then we also need to think and go beyond the instruments that we have set up. They're very important, they're very useful, they will allow us to come out of this crisis with 27 stronger countries. But we need to go beyond this, because there are great challenges ahead. I don't think that we can come out of COVID with the rules that we had before COVID. Now, many of the rules have been suspended, and that's good news. But we cannot reintroduce these rules as they were pre-COVID. I believe that it would be a good idea to embark on a great debate with no taboos, because the rules that generated so much inequality, that made us face this difficult period of COVID, these rules have to be reviewed, they have to be updated, and they have to be put to the service of our communities and of our companies. I think this is a lesson that we've been taught by COVID, and we cannot ignore it. We can't just put it in a drawer and forget about it, because what we're talking about here is the burden that will have to be borne by women, by the weakest, by the youngest, the burden borne by this crisis. So we have a lot on our plate yet.
Boa noite.